Scott William here, Home City Home Life. Today we're going to talk about my late wife, Susan Maria. Yeah, I probably should have called this segment All I Know About Susan Maria because she had a full life before she met me. Susan was born 1/12/65 in Ishpeming, Michigan, and she passed away last year on October 1st, 2022, and her demise may have been helped along for. Anyway, Susan was raised by her parents in Escanaba, Michigan, Robert and Mary Margaret Deline. And they lived, to me, it was an ideal setup. I'm not sure how Susan felt about it, but she lived a couple blocks from a sand beach. There's a lighthouse that her friend actually lived in at the time. We went through it later when I visited there. It's now a museum. There's a marina there. There's a playground. There's tennis courts. It's kind of a cool area she lived in, a beautiful area. So she had a good childhood, and she worked at the famous Dauber's pasty shop growing up. And she graduated from Escanaba High School in 1983. And about that time, she was experiencing something wrong with her leg. And I don't know if it was leg drop or what have you, or it was paralyzed. But I don't know. She just said there was something wrong with her leg. She couldn't move it. So her parents brought her here. And this is Marshfield, Wisconsin. And we have one of the biggest clinics in the country here. They brought her here. They couldn't determine what was wrong with her. And so they went on to the famous Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. They didn't know what was wrong with her either. And it just kind of resolved itself, they said. But while she was here, she met the man that she would later marry and have 5 sons with. Somehow they got together and she moved to Marshfield. She had 5 sons with him, and later on they divorced. She married again, had 2 daughters and another son. And later on they would divorce as well. During that time, she had her right eye detached, her retina detached. And so that eye had to be removed. And from that period on, during the second marriage, she was sporting a artificial eye, but it was a little hard to tell. By all accounts, Robert and Mary Margaret Derlene were great parents for Susan. I knew Bob very well. He was a great man. He was a funny man. I loved that guy as a father-in-law. And I actually have his Packer gnome hiding underneath my TV there. It's one of the things I inherited from him. I met Susan online through a dating site called SinglesNet. I wrote to her one time, and she completely, and it would have been in like 2009. I wrote to her, and she completely ignored the message I sent to her. So after a few months, I wasn't getting any response, actually. I decided to change my ad and change my pictures. And I tried again, and I wrote to her again. And this time she replied. And as it turned out, she just lived a few blocks from where my parents live. I was living in the Wausau area at the time. So I came down here on a weekend, and we met halfway. I'll show you all about that when it gets warmer out. By 2010, Susan and I had already decided that we were going to be together, but I didn't want to live in the house that she shared with her 2 previous husbands. So we were preparing her house for sale when all of a sudden one day she took off mysteriously. And later on that evening, we were watching TV in my parents' basement down here, and she proposed to me. And I accepted, of course. I was going to propose to her in December that same year, but she beat me to it. And it turns out she had left to ask my parents for permission to marry me. And they were just leaving, and she had chased them down the alley here. And she caught up with them and asked them. And they said, of course, because they loved her. My mom loved her. My mom has since passed away. And so, yeah, that's how we became a couple. And the rest is history. We got married in 2011. And the picture you see that I used as a thumbnail was taken at Rib Mountain State Park. We were up there scouting it out for a place to get married. But as it happens, the pavilion that they have up there was going to be remodeled in 2011, and they were redoing the road, so they weren't renting that out at the time. And so we got married at Hamas Park here in Marshfield instead. One thing you may not have known about Susan is that she was adopted. And somewhere along the line, I learned, or she told me, that she had reached out and found her birth mother. They had a kind of a relationship, but it was a strained relationship because she had another daughter a year later that she kept, and she had given Susan up for adoption, and that kind of made Susan wonder, well, why did she keep her and not me? So she was kind of a strained relationship there. And the birth mother would not tell Susan anything about her birth father other than that they were engaged at one point, and I believe that the birth father's mother was Puerto Rican. And that's all we knew. But Susan wanted to know, shortly after we got married, Susan wanted to know who her birth father was, but she wanted to do it quietly because her father that raised her was still alive, and he was a good man and didn't want to hurt him. So we kind of did this on the sly, knowing that her birth father and birth mother were engaged. I surmised that there probably was a newspaper article about the engagement. I did some research on what paper we thought that they might be in, and I looked online where they would store information on those newspapers, on that particular newspaper. It turned out that the college in Marquette, Michigan, housed a bunch of microfiche with various newspapers on it, including the one that I thought maybe that announcement would be in. So one day, myself and Susan and my parents loaded up and drove 4.5 hours north from here to Marquette, Michigan, early in the morning. We got there, and there was dozens of microfiche that had the potential announcement in it. So, and there was only one machine. So I sat there and I went through all those rolls of microfiche, and we were there for about 7 hours. And I was down to the last roll, and my Susan was getting very upset. She didn't think we were going to find it because we were down to the last roll and hope was dwindling. And we got down to the last name on the last roll, and there it was. I believe her last name was Hull, could have been Hall. And there was just a picture of her. I guess at the time it was customary just to have the woman in the engagement pictures. So it was just a picture of her and his name. And yes, I found his name. So, Peter R. Plott, I abbreviated his last name to protect his anonymity. This is your life. We had driven 4.5 hours up and 4.5 hours back, spent 7 hours going through all this microfiche, and then we came home, and Susan had intended to reach out to Peter, her birth father, and then not long after that, though, she fell and broke her pelvis, and the doctor said, well, that fall shouldn't have broke her pelvis. They did a bunch of tests, including a spinal tap, and determined that she had secondary progressive MS. And so, the idea that Susan wanted to reach out to her birth father kind of went by the wayside. Susan did not want to reach out to her birth father and surprise him, potentially, that, hey, you have a daughter, and I'm sick. She didn't want to say that. She didn't want to burden him with that, despite he may or may not deserve that kind of consideration. So I found out, I had the name. We drove back here. I did research, and I found out where Peter R. Plot, R-Plot, I abbreviated it, like I said. I found out he lives, I don't know exactly where he lives, but he lives in North Carolina. Don't worry, nobody wants anything from you. I just wanted you to know. I sat on this information for 10 years. I spent all that time. I wasn't going to keep it secret forever. I don't care one way or another, though. I just thought you had a right to know. If you were kept from knowing your daughter, I think you had a right to know. He's probably retired now. He's 78. And there's also an email address. So, Peter, you're going to get an email soon. Now, if the birth mother kept the information that she was pregnant from Peter, that's just wrong. It's just wrong for a parent to keep another parent from their child unless they're, degenerate criminal or something. It's just wrong. Peter, now if you, I know you were young at the time, probably around 20. If you ran away, there's some shame in that, obviously. This woman, Susan Maria, my wife, she lived her entire life without you, and she still wanted to know you regardless. And then in the end, she didn't want to burden you because she had MS. So, Peter R. Plot, this was your flesh and blood. You deserve to know one way or another. But this woman, this beautiful lady, my wife, was out there for you. She was looking for you. And she wanted to know who you were. So here are a few pictures of what would have been your daughter, your biological daughter. She was Robert Delean's daughter, through and through, and she'll always be Robert Delean's daughter. But you were her biological father, and she was your biological daughter, and that means something. That means something. Here's the picture I used as a thumbnail. That cross is from her casket, by the way. And then I have a cropped version of that up here. This picture here is from our honeymoon. And here's another one from our honeymoon. Here's another one from our wedding day at the place that we met. Here's one at a Brewer game. She had never been to a Brewer game or a Packer game until she met me. Here's one of our engagement pictures. Over here is another engagement picture. Over here is one of our wedding pictures. Sorry about the glare. And down here is another one. That cross hung on Susan's wall. I don't know the story behind it. It looks pretty old. And there's another engagement or wedding picture, actually. And then we have our big picture, a big wedding picture. Got a glare there again. Try to get rid of the glare. Right there, a big wedding picture. So that was Susan. There's a lot more pictures. I intend to do a musical video tribute to Susan. I would like to use the Ozzy Osbourne song "See You on the Other Side," but you know, the copyright BS, that ain't gonna happen. So I'll have to find something that's not copyrighted, that's a little bit long, that has the feel I'm looking for. I'll put together some photos and video of Susan, and maybe I'll have a couple shots of me in there, who knows, or me talking. So that's it. This is all about Susan. Scott Williams for Home City Home Life, signing off. Please like and subscribe. Most videos would be a little bit more upbeat than this one, though.